Day 946 of the Ukrainian War map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 647,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,400 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 10 tanks, 44 APVs, 71 artillery, a back-breaking 105 vehicles, many of which are unarmored tin cans, and a significant 7 air defense systems, 3 of which turned out to be a late inclusion from failed Russian Jankoi defenses, air defenses from back a few days ago. Then headed across onto the map, starting out in the southeast front lines, so of the Donbass, onto the Vuhledar axis, where just northeast of this front, Russian forces continue to push, this time into a new position, with taking the second half remainder of the tip of this location, which happens to be a coal plant, and a location that Russian aviation was hammering into over the past 3 weeks or so. So it's all part of Russia's operational goal to encircle Vuhledar and capture it, which is where Ukraine's main stronghold is, so northwest of the 532 highway. Although Russia does have some infantry elements in the easternmost part of the village just beyond the highway, as right there you can see some Russian walkers there, which were geolocated to the east, and is part of what actually makes that sublocation a grow zone. Though it is quite dangerous to be out in the open like that, with both sides having effectively referred to this as infantry meatwave tactics, with one such angry Russian mill blogger, Russian ultranationalist Vladislav Shurgin, stating most recently on Telegram that Russian commanders are throwing away their troops in performative assaults to impress their superiors. His various commentaries highlights a persistent contributing factor to Russia's very high casualty rates, with this mill blogger going as far as to reveal the Russian army's pattern of institutionalized lying, giving examples of staged training, fake manpower figures, and false claims of having captured targets, with also calling them, quote, fat-faced degenerates who stupidly call themselves commanders, who blame their own men for their own deaths. So revelations like these are quite consistent, if not very consistent, with all of the observations over time that we've made. The only difference now being is a larger band of very vocal dissenting voices within the Russian military space, who are fed up with and flat out breaking the law of discrediting their own army, which was a new article introduced to the Russian Criminal Code, and only added as recently as 2022. What a coincidence. But as for the map, Ukraine's 72nd Brigade has denied reports of their withdrawal from Vuhledar, with a soldier speaking from the city amid ongoing explosions, confirms that despite heavy assaults, they remain in position. Then headed up the map as there's been some small incremental Russian gains in the Pokrovsk direction, a location that's not just infantry, where these forces have an increased allocation of vehicles, which are in turn being hunted down by Ukrainian FPVs. And as per my expectation from comments I made last month, we're seeing a degradation in the quality and type of vehicles used in these invader assaults. I wasn't alone in this assessment, and I know many of you had a similar expectation. As for instance, we clearly see here not tanks, not infantry fighting vehicles, and potentially not even any armoured personnel carriers, as the Russian forces have evidently, for this location on the map, chosen to perform these offensive operations with pickup trucks, Buhanka vans, and various other vehicles of a similar tin can nature. Of course, I'm kidding about the chosen part, as no soldier of an assault unit in their right mind would choose an unprotected thin sheet of tin can metal over an infantry fighting vehicle or a heavily armoured tank. Now, it's fair to say we'll still see plenty more armoured vehicles from Russia. They won't stop overnight, but as with those former comments continuing to bear some fruit, we will see a steady decline in the number of, and quality of armored Russian vehicles with each and every large-scale attritional push they perform on the map. Think Bakhmut, think Avdiivka. Every time we've seen a decrease in the quality of Russian hardware, and not just vehicles, but artillery platforms as well, including a rare handful of World War II artillery, as the Russian Pyrrhic victories just continue to exhaust their Soviet stockpiles. In fact, just 50 kilometers northeast of here, as the crow flies, up in the Touretsk direction, as we just saw Russian forces now using lightly armored pickup trucks in frontal attacks on Ukrainian positions. Although this one, like those before it, is an infield makeshift design, seemingly with very limited protection on the front, instead opting for a little extra on the sides and the back. It sounds like I just described a haircut, and truly, the Russian army is getting a haircut. But in the end, to use something like this, well, if it's a dangerous environment for Russian tanks, then it's unquestionably a very problematic solution for Russian ground forces, and for what should be their most elite units, perform in frontline offensives in this manner. And as for New York and Touretsk right here, somewhat impressively stable, with the front lines not moving here in a number of days now. There is a little bit of rain now on the weather dynamic, with right about just 30 days from now, this region hits the wet and muddy season, making for any advancing offensive operations just dangerously pointless. Then speaking of pointless, or at least what turned out to be pointless, as in the east we saw the destruction of a Russian Zoopark 1M counter-battery radar system by the 45th Brigade of Ukraine, around $20 million a unit worth right there. Then also, we saw a Russian T-62 tank turned into Swiss cheese from a DP-ICM cluster munition. The ammunition load stored in the tank's turret had its weak armor pierced, leading to a very clean and obvious turret toss, but not breaking any height records by any stretch of the imagination. Rather, it's the T-72s or T-80 main battle tanks that are particularly prone to the higher velocity and higher ceiling catastrophic turret ejections. It's a problematic Russian tank design flaw, across the board really. Then also headed to the northeast at Vovchansk, as we saw what could be the footage just prior to the special unit of the Ukrainian military intelligence, the Paragon unit, who were providing fire support to other units with FPV strikes at the aggregate plant. Now, it's less clear to see the impact made from this footage and these stills, but it clearly helped as Ukraine since liberated the plant. Then also in Vovchansk, more clearing operations with Ukrainian quadcopters in pursuit of and targeting an MTLB of the Russian forces. There is no secondary recon drone angle of this event that exists, but the probability of this vehicle getting away unscathed was highly improbable. Then to move across and briefly head into some news bits and pieces for today. So starting off, in a major boost, the US announced a $375 million military aid package for Ukraine, which includes longer-range JSOW munitions for the F-16s, with this impressive addition that contains a range of 130 kilometers or about 81 miles when launched from high altitudes. And to that end, this is part of a historic $7.9 billion package from the US reinforcing Ukraine's defenses. Now, there was a concern that most of these previously allocated funds for Ukraine from the US would expire if not fully utilized. However, the US administration confirmed that these funds were successfully allocated before the deadline, ensuring continued support against Russian aggression. And then we'll move across to some Russian hardware news of a sort, as Putin, once again, unleashed his most powerful weapon in this war, the nuclear threat. Because at a very recent Russian Security Council meeting, Putin hinted at a shift in Russia's nuclear doctrine, suggesting that aggression from a non-nuclear state, if supported by a nuclear power, would be considered a joint attack on Russia. So this announcement, seemingly bold, is seen by many as another psychological tactic, a Kremlin PR maneuver, if you will, to stir fear among Western leaders and their citizens rather than a concrete change in policy. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, Putin is effectively saying here that a potentially updated Kremlin policy will see the use of nuclear weapons in response to the use of non-nuclear weapons. Specifically for Western-supplied medium-range missiles that can reach Moscow, for instance, which is something that Putin really fears. But a nuclear for non-nuclear exchange is a real tall order. Now, whether it's analysts or former Putin confidants alike, it all creates this picture that Putin very much realizes to make a nuclear move like this would be a death sentence. Not to mention, giving up his truly billionaire luxurious lifestyle, where unofficially he's the richest man on the planet. But my angle to all of this is perhaps much more cynical, because I can't stop myself from saying the following, that kudos to Putin for timing this oddly televised Security Council meeting right in the middle of a UN General Assembly week. There's an especially obvious nature to what he's trying to achieve here. Then we'll head across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So, seems we have here a citizen of Moldova. In fact, best for reference, let's pop that one up on the map, with the context being that there is a non-internationally recognized breakaway region to its east, Transnistria. And so this citizen of Moldova, with the testicular fortitude to go in his attempts to cross the border of Moldova to unrecognized Transnistria, with a fascinating incident outplaying. And if you're still on the fence about Moldova being occupied or otherwise completely controlled by Russia in the region of Transnistria, then this might lay that notion to rest, as we see here the Moldovan citizen pulling up to the checkpoint, filming the very clearly Russian soldier, where naturally the Russian checkpoint soldier was not fond of the guy filming his interaction with him, with the Moldovan guy behind the camera being quite ballsy and cheeky, saying that he can film and do whatever he wants as he's technically still in Moldova. He then also asks, or just flat out says to the Russian guard, "What checkpoint? What are you even doing here? Where are you from?" Basically undermining the Russian soldiers' authority on the Transnistrian Moldova border, let's say. Then the driver yells at them to go back to their own country, where they can tell people not to film. The Russian soldiers then say that they will and that they are going to now detain him. So then he gets out of his car and says, again, he's Moldovan, they're Russian, authoritatively giving it to them, saying, "You're confused, you can't detain me in my own country." And then he casually walks back to his car and drives off. The guy's got some balls. Surely he's packing something as well, as he repeatedly undermines their authority. Based on the video as well, it actually seems that he got through, leading to my suspicions of this not actually being the first time for him, and he knows how to handle these guys. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, all of those great, wonderful, helpful things, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.